After getting the invitation to sign a project worth $33 million, my son started packing his things to go to the airport. Quietly, I discovered that my daughter-in-law was hiding something in his suitcase. I took advantage of her stepping out and opened it. I froze. Silently, I put it back in the suitcase. Luke. 30 feet later, the police arrived. I'm happy you're here. If you are watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening to my story of revenge. I want to know how much time has passed. The aroma of fresh coffee spread throughout my small kitchen. Robert, my son, came downstairs with his face bright as the sun. He greeted me with a brilliant smile. "Mom, today is a big day," he said excitedly. He greeted me with a brilliant smile. At the table, Charlotte, my daughter-in-law, had already prepared breakfast. She greeted me with a brilliant smile, but her smile was weary, as if she was having trouble maintaining it. "Mum, let me get breakfast," Robert said. "Mum, if this goes well, I'm going to be promoted to assistant director. Can you imagine it? The Solar Red Company will expand across the whole country, he said, laughing. His eyes shone. I cried, exhaling excitement. My gaze went to Charlotte. She was silently gathering Robert's personal items into a small box, her movements slow and her back hunched. She didn't respond to her husband's enthusiasm. She didn't smile. Suddenly, Robert's phone rang. It was an unknown number. He smiled, quickly looked at the screen, and stood up. "I'm going outside to answer it," he said, walking toward the backyard and closing the door. I got up to get water in the kitchen, but my eyes never left Charlotte in the living room. She looked toward the yard where Robert was talking on the phone. Then, as if making sure no one was watching, she walked over to his suitcase. Her hand trembled as she pulled out a small packet wrapped in white paper. My heart tightened. Charlotte looked around one more time and quickly hid the packet among the t-shirts in Robert's box. She smoothed the fabric carefully, as if afraid of leaving a mark. When she was finished, she stood up, let out a long sigh, and went to the basement, muttering something about checking the bathroom. The glass of water in my hand was cold, but inside I was burning. Why would Charlotte do something so secretive? I walked to the box, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break. I looked toward the stairs. Charlotte was still in the basement. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the plastic dishwashing gloves, and put them on. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was a mother's instinct to protect her son. I returned to the living room, sat down beside the box, and carefully lifted the t-shirt. The package was hidden inside a rolled-up t-shirt. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped it. I unwrapped the paper, and inside was a small Ziploc bag. I saw a little white powder, a wad of new dollar bills, and a fake ID card. The photo on the card was of Robert. I felt as if my blood was turning to ice. I couldn't breathe. These were things I had only seen in crime movies, but now they were in front of me, in my son's luggage. If this was what Charlotte was doing, what was she trying to accomplish? To hurt Robert? Or was it some secret I still didn't know about? I looked at Charlotte's beige purse hanging on the back of the sofa. Without thinking twice, I took the packet, put it back in the Ziploc bag, and hid it in the inner compartment of her purse. Then, I replaced the clothes in Robert's suitcase and closed the zipper with a click, as if nothing had happened. I took off the gloves and put them in my son's luggage. My heart was still pounding hard. Just then, the doorbell rang loudly, shattering the silence of the house. I jumped. My shoe nearly fell off my hand. Charlotte came down the stairs with a dark face and panicked eyes. "Mom, who is it?" she asked in a breathless voice. I didn't answer, just walked toward the door, trying to stay calm. Two police officers were on the porch, one older with a friendly smile, the other younger with a notepad in his hand. "Excuse us for bothering you, Mrs. Miller," the older officer said in a calm voice. "We're just doing a routine neighborhood patrol. Is everything okay here?" I smiled, even though it was difficult inside. "Yes, everything is fine, thank you," I replied, trying to make my voice sound natural. They nodded. They saluted me and left. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath to calm down. But when I turned around, Charlotte's eyes met mine. She looked at me in silence, then turned and tightened her grip on the strap of her purse. The silence that remained in the house after the police left was suffocating. I walked into the living room, and my gaze stopped at the wedding photo on the television screen. In the image, Robert and Charlotte were smiling radiantly, holding hands in front of the church in Boston. I closed my eyes and let myself be carried away by the memories, back to the days when happiness was still complete. I am Elizabeth Miller, a retired literature professor. At 62, I thought my small family was finally complete. My husband, James, died in a work accident when Robert was starting high school. The day I received the news, I was paralyzed, clutching his photo in the middle of the hospital. Since then, only Robert and I remained, mother and son, supporting each other in this house. I worked tirelessly, teaching night classes and spending every dollar so he could go to college. He was smart, ambitious, and always my pride and joy. Every time he received an award, I would whisper to James's photo, "Look, my love, our son is incredible." I remember perfectly the day Robert introduced me to Charlotte. It was a clear fall afternoon. Robert walked in holding the hand of a young woman with long, dark, bright, but shy eyes. "Mum, this is Charlotte," he said proudly. Charlotte looked down and greeted me with wide eyes. "Welcome, Mom," I said. "Mom," she said anxiously, correcting herself immediately. I laughed and hugged her. "Call me Mum. Good." From that moment on, I loved her, not just because she was my daughter-in-law, not just because she made my son happy, but because her sincerity was evident in every gesture. Their wedding day was one of the most beautiful days of my life. The church in Boston was filled with golden light that streamed through the stained glass windows, creating reflections on the floor. Charlotte walked in a white gown embroidered with roses, more beautiful than any bride I had ever seen. Robert, elegant in his black suit, held her hand. When he put the ring on her, I couldn't hold back my tears. I took James's photo and whispered, "Look, my love, our son has grown up. He's found a good woman." Charlotte was wonderful. She had graduated with honors in business management, but after marrying, she decided to leave her job to dedicate herself to the home. Once I asked her, "Don't you regret leaving a good job?" She smiled and replied sweetly, "I want to spend time with Robert and you. Family is more important." I was touched, though I also felt a bit of fear. Would a young woman so capable truly be happy staying at home? Charlotte quickly adapted to our life. She learned to cook my favorite turkey and mashed potatoes, though the first time it was a bit salty. And Robert joked, "Do you want to raise Mum's blood pressure?" Charlotte pouted and apologized, but I just laughed. "It's okay. Next time I'll show you how to cook it better." Those quiet evenings were my treasure. The three of us would sit on the sofa, watching a comedy on TV. Robert would put his feet on the coffee table. Charlotte would rest her head on his shoulder, and I would point, laughing at every scene and then at some silent joke. Our laughter would fill the whole house. Once Charlotte asked me, "Mum, do you think I look like the main character in the movie?" I laughed and poked her cheek. "You are much funnier," Robert whispered, but loud enough for us to hear. We all laughed, and in that moment, I felt our family was finally complete. But everything started to change about a year after the wedding, when the first signs appeared. Robert began receiving strange calls and always went out to the balcony to answer them. I pretended to wash the dishes, but I paid attention. He spoke calmly and sometimes laughed. A laugh I hadn't heard in a long time when he spoke with Charlotte or me. "Yes, good. See you tonight," I heard him say in an animated tone, before quickly hanging up and returning to the house as if nothing had happened. I wanted to ask him, but every time I saw his eyes, I told myself, it must be work, nothing more. Then the late-night dinners began. The spaghetti Charlotte had prepared so carefully, the warm apple pie that had taken all afternoon to bake, would be getting cold on the table. Charlotte would sit there, her fork neatly placed beside her plate, looking at the door, waiting for Robert. Once I saw her wait until 9 o'clock in the evening without touching her food. "Eat first, don't hurt your stomach," I advised her in a gentle voice. She just bowed her head and smiled sadly. "I want to wait for him, Mum. Maybe he's busy." Robert changed, not only in his behavior but also in his appearance. He started taking better care of himself, buying expensive designer shirts, the ones he used to say were a waste of money. He changed his cologne, switching from the citrus scent that Charlotte liked to a strong, woody one, so penetrating it made me tear up every time he passed by. "Mum, the company is growing now. I have to look good," he explained when I asked him. I looked at Charlotte, who lowered her head and gripped the edge of the table in her hands. I felt something was happening. I knew it, but I said nothing. Charlotte tried to keep him by her side, even if it was just little things. She cut her hair, now short and framing her face, which made her look younger. "Mum, do you think I look good like this?" she asked me one morning with hope in her voice. "Very pretty, honey. I'm sure Robert will love it," I replied cheerfully. She also started cooking more elaborate dishes, like chicken in red wine, which she learned by watching the same video twice. But Robert didn't seem to notice. One night, Charlotte put on a new red dress, sat in front of the mirror, and asked her husband, "Do you like how I look?" Robert looked up from his phone and replied without interest, "It's okay." And then he went back to looking at the screen. Charlotte dropped her arms, and her smile faded. I was in the kitchen trying to wipe the table, but inside my soul ached. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid of making things worse. I began seeing her cry alone, not inside the house, but in the backyard, where she normally tended the plants. Once I saw her among the rose bushes with the cleaning rag in her hand, while sobbing under her breath. When she saw me, she quickly wiped her eyes and said with a forced smile, "Mum, dust got into my eyes." I didn't contradict her, just walked over and patted her on the back, but I knew she was crying because her heart was breaking. The night of their third wedding anniversary was the last straw. Charlotte had been preparing all day. She went to the store early to buy fresh flowers and took out the blue candles that she knew Robert loved. "I asked him to come home early, Mum. I want to surprise him," she told me excitedly. The table was decorated like a fancy restaurant, with a spotless white tablecloth, red roses in the center, and the pot roast she had been cooking since the afternoon. I looked at her and felt affection. At 10 o'clock in the evening, the front door finally opened. Robert stumbled in, smelling of alcohol and an unfamiliar perfume. He threw his briefcase onto the sofa, his eyes bloodshot. Charlotte immediately stood up from the table and said in an agitated voice, "Do you know what day it is?" Robert scoffed and shouted, "I'm tired, Charlotte. What do you do besides cooking and crying all day at home, imagining things?" His voice sounded cold, harsh, as if he wanted to crush any effort she made. Charlotte cried, her hands gripping her dress. I couldn't bear it anymore. I walked over and hugged her from behind. I'll talk to him, honey. Sometimes men get stressed from work. Don't be sad. But deep down, I knew he was lying to me. It clearly wasn't work. The next morning, I waited for Robert in the kitchen when he came downstairs, looking for something to eat. I made him a glass of iced tea, put it in front of him, and said in a serious voice, "Robert, you shouldn't talk to your wife like that. She spent the evening preparing something for you." He interrupted me, angry. "Has Mum complained again? I told you she's becoming more and more unbearable." I froze, looking into his eyes, searching for the respectful son I once had, but only seeing a cold gaze full of contempt. "She is your wife, not a stranger," I said firmly. He looked at me without hesitation. "Mum, stay out of our business." Then he turned and left the kitchen, leaving me alone with a cold cup of coffee. The atmosphere in the house became heavy. Robert and Charlotte barely spoke to each other. Meals, once a family gathering, were reduced to the sound of silverware hitting cold, hard plates. Charlotte ate in silence with downcast eyes, while Robert finished quickly, as if he just wanted to get away from the table. I, sitting between them, tried to start a conversation by talking about the weather or the food, but all I got were short answers. "It's delicious, Charlotte," I said once, trying to break the ice. She nodded with a cold smile and continued eating. I looked at Robert, but he barely looked back without saying a word. A week later, Robert came home earlier than usual, a rarity in those months. I was cleaning the living room when I heard the keys in the door. He walked in with an animated expression, put a thick folder on the table, and said excitedly, "Mom, Charlotte, I have good news." I stopped cleaning and looked at him. Charlotte, who was cleaning vegetables in the kitchen, also stopped and looked at him with curiosity. Robert sat down, opened the document folder, and said proudly, "My company received an invitation to go to New York to sign a contract to build a solar power plant valued at over $33 million. If this deal goes through, I will be promoted to assistant director." He burst out laughing, slamming his hand on the table, as if the whole world were his oyster. I couldn't contain my joy. I patted him on the back. "That's wonderful, Robert. Luck is finally on your side. When you succeed, you'll have more time for your family, right?" I said hopefully, wishing this opportunity would be the light that would help clear the tension between him and Charlotte. I looked at her, expecting a smile, a sign of enthusiasm, but Charlotte did not look happy. She slowly put the chopsticks she was holding on the table. Her gaze was fixed on Robert, without a hint of warmth. A fake smile appeared on her lips, but it failed to conceal the tension. "How long will you be gone?" she asked in a neutral voice, as if the question had nothing to do with Robert's good news. I noticed something strange in her tone. It wasn't curiosity, it was distrust. Robert scoffed and replied briefly, 3 days. The meeting is on Friday." Charlotte didn't say anything more. She just nodded and stayed silent, carrying the dishes to the kitchen, even though lunch wasn't over yet. I watched her walk away with a heavy heart. That night, I stayed in my room with the book open in my hands, but my mind was elsewhere. Suddenly, the shouts of an argument shattered the silence of the house. I put the book down, walked slowly toward the door, and opened it a crack to listen better. Charlotte's voice sounded full of suppressed anger, as if she had held it inside for too long. "Aren't you going with her? Wasn't there anyone else in the company who could go? Why did it have to be you?" I could hear the pain in her words, as if her heart was breaking too. Robert shouted furiously, "Are you crazy? This is a real business trip. Stop imagining things. You're destroying my career." Charlotte was trembling, her voice shaking. "It's Lisa, isn't it? Your new secretary. Don't think I don't know about those times you said you were meeting with a client, but you were actually eating lunch with her." I froze, my hand clutching the doorknob. Lisa. That name struck me like a lightning bolt. I remembered when I went to visit Robert at the company and saw that young secretary with bright blonde hair and a sweet smile, but with a cold look. She was always too kind to him, but distant with everyone else. It could be. A loud crash echoed, perhaps the sound of a vase being knocked over. I was startled. I took a step toward the door, intending to intervene, but I stopped. I remembered Robert's look of contempt the other day when he told me not to interfere. I lowered my hand with a heavy heart. I told myself it was just a couple arguing and they would fix it on their own. I sat down, but sleep wouldn't come. Outside, the wind rustled through the leaves, producing a constant murmur. I closed my eyes, praying that contract of $33 million would be the opportunity for Robert and Charlotte to find each other again. Robert's hurried voice from the living room pulled me out of my thoughts about the previous night's fight. "Mum, hurry! The taxi is here!" he shouted impatiently. I quickly put on my dress and walked out. We arrived at the Boston Logan Airport in a tense atmosphere. Robert was checking his phone non-stop, muttering about the meetings in New York, completely oblivious to Charlotte's uncontrollable silence. She was sitting in the back with me, gripping the strap of her beige purse with a blank stare. I looked at her, but she lowered her head, avoiding my eyes. The airport was crowded and noisy. Announcements over the loudspeakers mixed with the voices of passengers. Robert quickly checked his luggage and took his black duffel bag to the counter. The employee zipped it up, and the bag disappeared below the conveyor belt. I stood a few steps away, my heart racing. I looked at Charlotte and saw her staring at the bag, biting her lip until it turned white. I was worried because I thought the package was still inside or that she knew something. I didn't want to take her aside and ask her, but Robert returned and handed me a pass to the VIP lounge. "Mom and Charlotte, come and sit down. I'm going to buy a few things," he said in a calm voice before leaving. Charlotte and I went through security without saying a word. I tried to start a conversation. "Do you want me to buy you some water, honey?" She shook her head softly. "No, thank you, Mum." The silence between us became heavier and heavier. Suddenly, a cold, firm voice echoed throughout the airport. "Urgent news. Due to a security alert, all passengers are requested to remain in their seats. The security team will conduct an emergency search. We appreciate your cooperation." A murmur spread through the crowd. I felt my heart beating uncontrollably. I looked at Charlotte and saw she was standing up, clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Sweat broke out on her forehead, and her eyes showed pure terror. A team of police officers, along with 2 dogs with big, watchful eyes, entered the security area. Their barking amplified, making the atmosphere even more intense, more tense. Passengers were forced to separate, and I saw Robert, who had returned with a bottle of water in his hand. He was stopped by an officer. "Good afternoon. Please allow us to check your carry-on luggage," the police officer said in a calm but firm voice. Robert nodded, handing over his duffel bag with a calm expression. The officer opened it, checked the laptop, the documents, and then nodded, handing it back. "Thank you," he said before leaving. I sighed with relief, thinking that luckily Robert's bag had already gone through the main conveyor and no one was searching it. But then one of the dogs stopped right in front of Charlotte, sniffed the air, and began to bark loudly directly at her purse. All eyes in the area turned to us. I felt my blood run cold. I had moved the package to Charlotte's purse, but I never imagined it would lead to this moment. Charlotte took a step back, murmuring, "No, there's nothing there." but the panic in her eyes gave her away. The police officer approached with the dog in a serious tone. "Ma'am, please let me search your purse." Another officer stepped forward, gesturing for Charlotte to hand it over. Charlotte hesitated, slowly touching the purse as if trying to buy time. The officer opened the purse, took out a wallet, a pen, a key ring, and paused. She pulled out a packet wrapped in white paper. She opened it, revealing a sealed bag with white powder, dollar bills, and a fake ID. The people around me began to murmur. Some took out their phones to record or take pictures. Charlotte cried out in a heartbroken voice, shocked. "No, that's not mine. I don't know where it came from." But the police had already restrained her, and the metallic sound of handcuffs slowly echoed amidst the general silence. I froze, paralyzed, as a wave of guilt and fear engulfed me. Robert, a few steps away, was pale. His gaze flickered between the package in the officer's hands and Charlotte, who was being escorted away. He looked at me as if seeking an explanation, but I just lowered my head. Robert took out his phone, his voice trembling. "Hello? This is Robert Miller. I have to cancel my flight to New York. My family has an emergency." His voice cracked as if he himself didn't understand what was happening. I stood in the middle of the chaos, consumed by guilt and fear. The news of the arrest at the airport spread like wildfire. That same evening, news portals ran the story that the wife of a young director of Solar Red was arrested for the possession of illegal substances and falsified documents. Solar Red's stock plummeted overnight. The $33 million project that Robert had pinned all his hopes on was suspended by his investment partner. His office phone rang non-stop, but Robert didn't answer. He locked himself in his office with the door closed, the only sound being the rhythmic thud of his fist hitting the desk. I stayed outside, my hand on the doorknob, wanting to knock, but terrified of finding a Robert I would no longer recognize. Finally, I went to the kitchen and made him a cup of ginger tea, as I had done for him when he was nervous since he was a child. I knocked gently on the door. "Robert, honey, I brought you some tea." He opened the door. His eyes were red and his hair was messy. He slumped into his chair, clutching his head. "Why, Mum? Why did she have to do this to me?" His voice was shaky, a mixture of pain and anger. I put the cup in front of him, took a deep breath, and sat down. I knew the moment had come to tell the truth, even if it might make him hate Charlotte even more. I started talking slowly, each word weighing on me. "I saw Charlotte put a package in your luggage this morning. I put on gloves, opened it, and found a bag with white powder, money, and a fake ID with another name. But your photo." I paused, looking into his eyes, waiting for his reaction. He lifted his head. His gaze went from surprise to fury. "She dead?" he yelled, slamming the table hard, making the cup rattle. "She dared to do this to me?" I continued, my voice shaking. "I don't know why she did it, but I couldn't let you take that package on the plane. I moved it to her purse just before the police arrived." Robert looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, but his anguish got the better of him. "She deserves it," he shouted, standing up and pacing back and forth. "She wanted to destroy me, to ruin my career." I watched him consumed by rage, while the weight on my chest grew heavier. His anguish worried me. He didn't ask why Charlotte would do something like that, or if there was a deeper motive. He only believed that she had betrayed him. That same night, I heard him call his lawyer with a cold voice. "Immediately file for a unilateral divorce. Reason: my wife's behavior has seriously damaged my reputation and career." I stood on the other side of the door, listening to every word, while shame cut me like a knife. I had led Charlotte to this situation, But I couldn't understand what had led her to do such a thing. A girl as sweet as Charlotte. Why would she do it? The following days, I couldn't sleep well. The images of Charlotte tending the plants in the garden, the food she prepared so carefully, her sweet smile when she spoke of Robert, all appeared with painful clarity. A girl like that, how could she do something so terrible? I wondered if maybe I had been too impulsive in switching the packages. Was there something more behind this that I didn't know? My initial anger toward Charlotte began to turn into confusion. I decided I had to see her. I had to hear the truth from her own mouth. I went to the detention center on a grey morning with the sky covered in heavy clouds. I sat across from Charlotte, separated by a thick plastic screen. I barely recognized her. She was emaciated, with dark circles under her eyes, and her once bright hair, now dull and softly tied back. She looked at me without rancor, only with a hopelessness that broke my heart. "Charlotte," I said fiercely, "why did you do it?" I asked her directly without beating around the bush, because I knew the visiting time was short. Charlotte lowered her head, clasped her hands together, and began to cry. Her voice trembled. "Mum, I know he wasn't going to New York for work. He was going with that secretary, Lisa. I heard him when he booked 2 plane tickets, 2 adjoining rooms at the hotel." Sobs floated under her breath. I just wanted to ruin that trip, for him to lose the contract and stay home. A friend told me that if I put some flour and fake documents in his carry-on, airport security would hold him for a couple of hours to investigate. I didn't know it was an illegal substance. I swear, Mum. I just wanted my husband to stay with me. I froze. Charlotte's words were like a knife breaking my heart. The stone of suffering inside me broke into 1,000 pieces. Then I understood that she was not the one who betrayed me first. The real cause of this tragedy was Robert, the son I had loved and protected all my life. I remembered his secret calls, the smell of someone else's perfume on his clothes, the times he came home late saying he had extra meetings. I chose not to believe those signs. I fooled myself into thinking everything was just for work. But now, with the truth in front of me, I felt as if I had lost my whole world. I looked at Charlotte and wanted to apologize, but my voice cracked. "Honey," I whispered, "I'm sorry." But she simply shook her head and smiled sadly. "Don't worry, Mum. I'll take responsibility for what I did." Her voice was frail, but firm. When the visit ended, I watched her walk away, escorted by the guards, and felt my soul being torn apart. The days of waiting until the trial felt endless. Robert didn't seem to worry about Charlotte at all. He locked himself in his office, making calls to save the Solar Red Company. The stocks were plummeting, and the $33 million project, which was his great hope, had been suspended by the partners. But instead of worrying about his wife, he only thought about divorce. "She doesn't deserve to be with me," he told me in a cold voice, as if Charlotte were a stranger. I looked into his eyes, trying to find my beloved son that I had, but only saw a man closed off by pride and anger. I couldn't stay by his side. I used all my retirement savings, the money I had saved for years, to hire a good lawyer for Charlotte. I found him in a small office in downtown Boston and told him the whole truth, that I had switched the packages, that Robert had betrayed Charlotte, and that Charlotte had only acted out of desperation. "Ma'am," the lawyer said in a serious voice, shaking his head, "a good intention does not justify a crime. The amount of substance found is too much. We can only ask for a reduced sentence." I cried with a heavy heart. I knew the chances of saving Charlotte were minimal, but I had to do it, if only to redeem myself. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was cold and solemn, with white walls and hard wooden benches. I sat in the family area near Robert, He was dressed in an expensive suit, his face impassive, never once looking at Charlotte. She was in the dock in a heavy prison uniform, small and broken, her hair tied back slightly, her eyes empty, but she stood tall, clinging to her last bit of dignity. The prosecutor presented the evidence with irresistible precision. The bag of white powder, the bundles of money, the fake ID in the name of Richard Morris, and the testimony of the airport police. Every piece of evidence was a blow to my heart. Charlotte's lawyer tried to defend her, explaining that she acted in the middle of an emotional crisis caused by her husband's betrayal. "Your Honor, my client only wanted to keep her husband, not commit a serious crime," he said in a firm voice. But the judge just shook his head, his expression impassive. "Personal intentions do not justify a violation of the law," he replied. The judgment was swift and merciless. The judge tapped the gavel, and his voice resonated. Charlotte Reed is sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for illegal possession and transportation of prohibited substances. The sound of the gavel was like a sword blow that shattered all hope. Robert's divorce was also approved at that moment, like a cold ending to a marriage that was once full of love. Charlotte did not cry, only closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking as if trying not to collapse. When the police took her away, they passed in front of us. Her gaze met Robert's, now devoid of love, only emptiness. Robert stood there with his arms crossed and his face impassive. When Charlotte disappeared from view, he turned to me with a smug smile and muttered, "Serves her right for being a traitor." That sentence was like an impact that ignited the powder keg inside me. All the restraint, the pain, and the anger exploded. I couldn't take it anymore. In the courtroom, amidst the reporters who still held cameras and microphones, I turned to Robert with a trembling hand and slapped him with all my might. The loud sound echoed, and everyone around us froze. "Traitor!" I cried, my voice broken with anguish and pain. "Who was the first to betray, Robert? If you hadn't been unfaithful, if you hadn't dismissed and crushed Charlotte's love, it wouldn't have ended like this. You caused this tragedy, and you still dare to laugh." The audience remained silent. Only the click of the cameras could be heard. Robert, startled, touched his red cheek and looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You're blind, Mum," he yelled. "You're defending a criminal instead of your own son. Lisa is the only one who understands me and deserves to be by my side." When I heard Lisa's name, I felt nothing but revulsion. I looked straight into his eyes with a damp voice. "If you dare to bring that woman into this house, the house your father built with his sweat, consider that you have no mother. From now on, don't call me Mum." I turned and walked away, ignoring Robert's furious shouts and the curious looks of the people. As I imagined, Robert showed no remorse. A few days after the trial, I heard the sound of his suitcase being dragged across the floor to the front door. I stood there, watching his silhouette walk out the front door without a word. On the counter, he left a hastily written note. "I will show you that my decision was the right one." I took the piece of paper with trembling hands, my heart heavy with despair. I went to his room and started organizing what was left. The photos of him and Charlotte, the happy moments I cherished so much. I put them in an antique wooden box, closed it, and placed it in the corner of the closet. I knew Robert would have to hit rock bottom to open his eyes. It wasn't long before I saw him on the news. Robert held a press conference at a luxury hotel in downtown Boston. Dressed in an expensive suit, he sat in front of a dozen microphones and declared with a confident voice, "I finalized my divorce and fired several disloyal employees. Solar Red will continue to grow stronger than ever." Then he introduced his fiancée, Lisa Morgan, his young secretary with bright blonde hair and a brilliant smile. She leaned on his arm, her lips painted in a smile that I only saw as calculated. Sitting in front of the television, I clutched the remote quietly, my heart heavy. I remembered the times I went to the company to visit Robert. Lisa was always nice to him, but cold and distant with the other employees. I never imagined she would go to the extreme of showing herself publicly with Robert, so soon after Charlotte's conviction. Robert began living a life of luxury, as if to show that he didn't need anyone else but Lisa. I heard the neighbors whispering that he bought her an expensive sports car, designer handbags, and took her on trips to places he used to say were only for special occasions. I saw the photos in the newspapers of Robert and Lisa smiling in a fancy restaurant and felt my heart sink. I thought of Charlotte, sitting in a jail cell, and wondered how my son could be so blind. To compensate for the losses from the $33 million project, Robert plunged into risky investments, ignoring the advice of his former partners. "Neighbor, Robert's company is full of debt," Mrs. Rose told me one morning at the supermarket. I just nodded, trying to hide the growing worry inside me. The downfall came faster than I imagined. One morning, while I was making coffee, my phone vibrated with a news alert. The headlines on the screen screamed, "Solar Red CEO, Robert Miller, under investigation for financial fraud and business manipulation. A partner accuses him of insider trading," and I stood there with trembling hands. The coffee pot almost fell. The article revealed something even worse. Lisa Morgan had disappeared, taking all the money from the company's reserved funds. They said she had run off with Robert's biggest competitor. I sank into my chair between pain and anger. I had warned him, but he wouldn't listen. Now his arrogance and blindness led him to this end. That night, the rain was pouring down. The downpour hammered hard on the windows, as if trying to break the silence of the house. I was sitting in the rocking chair to escape my heavy thoughts when I heard a faint knock on the door. I stood up with a small sense of uncertainty in my chest. When I opened it, I saw Robert standing there, soaked. He was no longer the elegant CEO he had been before. His wrinkled suit clung to his body. His hair was slicked back, his face drawn and tired. His eyes were red, full of despair and regret. I stood there, not knowing what to say. I just looked at the son I had loved all my life. Then Robert slid under the porch, out of the cold rain. "Mum, I've lost everything," he said in a heartbroken, trembling voice, like a lost child. Seeing him soaked in the rain, my heart ached, but I knew it wasn't the time to coddle him. I didn't rush out to hug him. I didn't comfort him as I had done when he was a child. I just opened the door wider and said in a calm but cold voice, "Come in. You'll catch a cold." Robert looked up with red eyes and stepped in silently. Water dripped from his clothes onto the polished floor, leaving long, dark trails. I went to the kitchen and prepared a cup of hot ginger tea, as I had done when Robert was having a hard time. The smell of ginger filled the space, but it didn't dispel the tension I felt inside. I put the cup in front of him and sat in the chair across from him, waiting in silence. I wanted to hear him, to know what he had understood after everything that had happened. Robert, trembling, took the cup, and the heat seemed to calm him a little. With the sound of the rain in the background, he began to speak in a hoarse voice, a subdued voice, as if every word was difficult to pull from his soul. "Lisa was never honest, Mom," Robert said, looking at the cup. "Every time I talked about getting married, she changed the subject. She said we needed more time, or that my career was the most important thing right now." He paused for a moment, gripping the cup tightly, regaining his composure. "She encouraged me to make risky investments, promising huge profits. I believed her, Mum. I thought she wanted the best for me, but it was all a trick designed by my business rivals." He recounted in a deadened voice what happened that morning. "I woke up in the apartment I had rented for her. The safe was empty, the drawer was open, and the company account was empty. Lisa had taken all of Solar Red's reserved funds and disappeared with my biggest competitor. Robert lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. I've been suspended from my position. I'm under investigation for fraud. My partners have turned their backs on me. My friends have distanced themselves. The apartment I was renting, the car I was paying for, everything is about to be repossessed. I'm dead in the water, Mum. I've lost everything. He looked at me with tearful eyes, desperate and remorseful. Now I understand, Mum. Now I understand how much Charlotte truly cared about me. He began recalling the small details, as if memories of Charlotte returned one by one, painful but clear. She knew what I liked to eat and what I didn't. She shined my shoes every morning with care, without a single wrinkle. When I was sick, she spent the whole night by my side, taking care of me without complaining. She always gave everything to the family. She was sweet. She never reproached me for anything. Robert rested his head on the table and began to cry like a child. And I treated her so badly, I doubted her. I scoffed at her love. I sent her to jail. I destroyed her life. I destroyed mine. His sobs filtered through the kitchen, mixing with the sound of the rain, like a sad, endless melody. I let him cry for a long time without interrupting him. When his crying subsided, I placed a gentle but firm hand on his back. I didn't comfort him with empty phrases. I didn't hug him as I had done when he was little. I looked him in the eyes and said in a calm but firm voice, "Tears solve nothing, Robert. You burned down your own house. Now you have to clean up the ashes." I paused, letting my words sink in. Take this as a life lesson for you to learn to be responsible for yourself and for others. Life doesn't let you grab the thread of experience too many times. I stood up, walked toward the window, and looked at the rain that continued to fall without ceasing. "Get up," I said firmly. "Start with what you still have, your health and this house. I don't promise it will be easy, but I'll be here when you really want to fix your mistakes." Robert looked up, his eyes still wet, but something different was visible in them. A small spark of hope, a cold light against the storm. He nodded without saying a word. He took the cup and took a sip as if trying to regain his strength. Many years have passed since that night of torrential rain. This house, which once saw the painful wounds of my family, is now slowly filling with light again. I heard that Charlotte had been paroled and released from federal prison early for good behavior. The day she got out, I went to greet her. I stood in front of the prison gate, with my heart pounding like a mother waiting for her daughter to return. When the iron gate opened, I saw Charlotte stepping out. She was no longer the innocent girl she had been before. She was thinner, her face more weathered, and her eyes bore the invisible scars of the difficult years. But when she saw me, a genuine smile touched her lips, as if she had found the warmth of family again. Charlotte came to my house that afternoon, not to see Robert, but to see me. She lowered her head, hugged me, and placed a small bag of tea in my hands. Her voice trembled when she said, "Thank you, Mum, for not abandoning me through all this." I looked into her eyes and saw sincerity, and also pain that hadn't gone away yet. During the years Charlotte was in prison, I visited her frequently, bringing her her favorite snacks and the books she used to read with me. I wanted her to know that even though she had made mistakes, I never stopped seeing her as my daughter. "You don't have to thank me," I told her, holding her hands. "Now you are free. I am the one who owes you an apology." Charlotte told me she was going to move from Boston to a small town in the South to start over. "I want a quiet life, Mum. No noise, no complications," she said. Her eyes sparkled when she talked about the future. I hugged her and squeezed her hands. You don't owe anyone anything anymore, Charlotte. Go live in peace. Be happy. You deserve it. We embraced for the last time. A big hug, full of affection, understanding, and forgiveness. When she left and her figure disappeared at the end of the road, I knew she was all right, that she had found the strength to rise from the ruins. Robert never saw Charlotte again. When I asked him, he just lowered his head and murmured, "I don't have the right, Mum." Since that rainy night, Robert has changed. He sold everything he had left, his apartment and his car on credit, to pay off his debts. He started from scratch as an ordinary employee in a small business. The expensive suits and the arrogant words no longer existed. Instead, I saw him tending the garden that his father, James, loved so much. He planted the trees, watered the flowers, fixed broken things around the house. Simple tasks that he had previously considered a waste of time. Every night he had dinner with me. We didn't talk much about the past, only about everyday things, the weather, the food, or some romantic movie on TV. In those moments, I saw the son I loved again, the one I remembered, although now he carried the scars of his mistakes. Once, while we were eating, Robert put down his fork, looked at me and said, "I've thought a lot about what you told me, Mum, about rising from the ashes. I'll try not to prove anything, but to truly live." I smiled and nodded with a warm heart. It was the first time in years I felt my son had truly matured. Over time, Robert and some friends opened a small, clean energy consulting company. It wasn't as large or as ambitious as Solar Red, but every step was firm. He often told me about his new projects with excitement, but without arrogance. "Mum, I'm going to do things right this time," he once said when he showed me a small but significant contract. I looked at him and saw that light in his eyes again, not the light of blind ambition, but of someone finding his way. Early this morning, I made a cup of coffee and walked out onto the porch to look at the fresh, watered garden after a rainy night. The sun was already starting to rise, and the drops on the leaves shone like diamonds. I saw Robert in a corner of the garden, focused on planting some rose bushes, his old t-shirt stained with dirt. I took a sip of coffee and felt at peace. Light in my soul, as if all the nightmares dissolved with the rain. I thought about the long road. I once thought that putting that package in Charlotte's purse was a way to protect Robert, an act of revenge, because I thought she had betrayed him. But then I understood that that act of vengeance almost destroyed everything. Vengeance only brings more harm, I thought, as I watched Robert smile next to a fresh rose. Only forgiveness. Forgiveness for the mistakes of others and forgiveness for our own darkness can bring true peace to the soul. The story you have just heard has changed names and places to protect the identities of the people involved. We tell it not to judge, but with the hope that someone will listen and reflect. How many mothers suffer in silence in their own homes? I really wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story can be a lamp that illuminates another's path. May God always bless us, and I am sure that the heart will lead us to better days. Now, at the end of the screen, I'll leave you with two of the most loved stories on the channel. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this point.